This is Amy, and you're listening to the Talking Appalachian Podcast. Today, we're diving into something I think is fascinating, and that's how artificial intelligence is learning to understand dialects and regional speech patterns. Probably like a lot of you, I text a lot throughout the day. So I started using text to speech on my phone, and no matter how hard I try to articulate my words, it still has trouble understanding what I'm saying, especially when it comes to my vowels. So the other day I was texting my kids and I said, "What do you want for supper tonight?" And my phone typed, "What do you want to bust this fight?" which makes no sense. And I can't tell you how many of those I've sent without checking the spelling or the words. So my husband just sends back a bunch of question marks, like I have no idea what you're trying to say. So why does this matter? Well, most AI translation models are trained on what's called a standard version of a language. So in English, we would call that standard English. That's the common phrase for the dialect of English that we teach in school. But in reality, language is way more diverse. And if you've learned anything from this podcast, I hope that that's one of the takeaways. People from different regions speak in different ways, and they use unique pronunciations and words and expressions. If you think about the difference between British and American English, for example, or even Spanish dialects across Latin America, and that's one of the reasons why we say that there are Appalachian Englishes in the plural and not one homogeneous dialect that everybody speaks throughout the region. Standard AI models often struggle with these differences, and that leads to awkward or inaccurate translations like what I experience when I do text-to-speech. A 2024 survey of 3,000 Americans by the language platform Guide to Fluency revealed the top 30 accents that leaves AI stumped most of the time. And you might be surprised to learn that Appalachian accents were not number one, but they did land at number 6, below New York, New Jersey, Texas, and Boston. Other accents on the list are Tennessee at 14, Virginia Piedmont at 21, Pittsburghese at 24, and what they call the Hoy-Toiter of the Outer Banks at 28. What's number one? Well, number one is the Southern accent, or what's better known as the accents of the Deep South. Now, some people confuse Southern with Appalachian, and while some of Appalachia is located in the South, you have to remember that the region extends all the way to New England, so its accents are influenced by migration patterns and industries that were different from those of the Deep South. So one example of this is the artfulness of Appalachia, like the way we say holler instead of hollow, and the R-lessness you tend to hear in the southern region or the flatlands, like dollar for dollar. So if you're like me, I knew very little about AI until this year, and I'm far from an expert now. So I went to an institute at UVA to learn more about it. Astrophysicist Dr. Paul Torrey explained that, quote, AI is the simulation of human intelligence in machines that enables them to perform tasks typically requiring the human brain. Dr. Torrey broke it down like this. Imagine a stop sign. If you want a computer to determine whether an image is in fact a stop sign, it's going to ask questions like this, like, are there 8 edges? Is it red? Does it say stop? But in AI problem solving, the question would be, are the properties of this object the same as all the other stop signs I have previously seen? If so, yes, it is a stop sign. And so this is how our brain works. AI depends on all the other data that has been collected before in order to make educated assumptions. So you might think this is all relatively new, but it actually took years to develop. This technology started at Dartmouth in the 1950s. The term artificial intelligence was created in 1956 during the Dartmouth Summer Research Project on AI. And it transformed over time into something that industries could use by the 1980s. And that was known as the AI boom. So over time, you had investors losing interest, and they called that the AI winters. And then you had investors getting more and more interested and putting money into research, and those were known as AI booms. It became available to us in the general public in the 2020s when another AI boom began with what is known as the large language models like ChatGPT, which was unveiled by OpenAI as a chatbot in 2022. So now in 2025, we're in the generative AI era where this technology takes existing data and produces new content like words and code and images and even music. And it's not just limited to speech recognition. It's being used in self-driving cars and healthcare, facial recognition. This is all according to Dr. Torrey, marketing, language translation, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. It creates a lot of concern, as you might imagine, in creative industries and education, because if machines have been trained using someone else's ideas or someone else's voice or someone else's image, it can use that content to create new content. But then the argument is it's not new or original, right? So that's why we teachers don't want students using it, for example, to write papers. And that's why artists don't want their creative content used to train machines. And it's also something to think about with podcasting, because podcasts can be created with AI now. You don't even need human voices. But personally, I don't want to listen to a podcast that's been created by a machine. I would rather listen to a human voice. So that's another podcast. Let's get back to speech recognition of our accents. Want more from the Talking Appalachian podcast? Head on over to our Patreon page where you'll get early access to episodes and bonus content like extended interviews with authors Barbara Kingsolver and Jeanette Walls, my interview with a Southwest Virginia woman who survived a concentration camp before moving to Appalachia, and my 3-part series on the language of Appalachian gravestones. Subscribers will be the first to know about any Talking Appalachian merch plus discounts. Subscribe on Patreon and Facebook, and if you're not ready to be a paid subscriber, you can subscribe for free and decide later. You can also find the podcast at Talking Appalachian on YouTube. So how does this technology work in the first place, this AI text-to-speech? Because it's everywhere. It's in our cars. If you have Alexa in your house or Google, it's our phones, it's our TV remotes. My TV remote has a microphone now. I can tell it what channel I want to watch or what show I want to watch, and it pops right up. So you're more likely now to interact with AI than a human when you're making appointments or troubleshooting or buying something online. But more importantly, what if somebody's using voice recognition in an emergency situation and it were to fail because it didn't understand the original speech? So I found an article by writer Alexander Gillis for Tech Target that explains this pretty well. But first, I want to give him kudos for saying this, and I'm quoting him here. Quote, accents and dialects are not something one can easily change, and they can be tied deeply to one's culture and community. Asking users to change how they speak for the system to understand them, however, should not be considered an option. I agree with him, obviously. You've heard me say this before, that of all of the components of dialect, I think grammar is probably the easiest to change, and accent is the hardest, because accent is more the way we pronounce our words. The phonology is more deeply embedded in the everyday, in the spoken language that we use. We're not as conscious of code switching that. And I think of all the parts of dialect, probably accent is the part that's closest to who we are and our identity. For my sake as a communication professor, I'm definitely going to code switch my grammar because I need to model that for my students. But it would be much harder for me to drop my accent. And I don't want to I'm not tied to vernacular grammar. I don't think my identity is necessarily based on that, but I feel like I am more in tune with accent, and that would be something I would be resistant to changing. I would not want that to be different personally. According to Gillis, speech recognition technology works this way. Audio is recorded through a microphone, and it's converted into a digital format that a computer can interpret, just like how we do a podcast. The system then breaks the audio into smaller components, which are analyzed using algorithms. These segments are compared to a database of language models and speech patterns to determine the most probable words or phrases that are being spoken. So how these models or these machines, quote, learn from an incredible amount of data is influenced by the quality and accuracy of the data. And see, that's where we sort of go off the tracks with regional accents. The training data typically consists of audio recordings paired with transcriptions, where each audio sample has an accurate transcription to reflect what was spoken. So speech recognition systems can only recognize accents and dialects that they've been trained to identify. So understanding accents depends on whether the model has actually encountered those accents in its training phase. Well-rounded training data set includes a broad range of accents, dialects, genders, ages, and speaking styles. And this variety helps the model to learn different speech patterns, and it helps it to establish connections between the various sounds and the words. Back to that chart of the 30 most misunderstood accent. The good news about that is that researchers are working to fix this. And the thing about AI is that even though it was invented in the 1950s, it has constantly, its use and it's constantly been evolving. And the more people that use it, the more information it has to work with. And that's, for me, a little bit of a scary thing, but it's also, I guess, a good thing in terms of some of the ways that it's being used. So one major step forward is training AI models with more diverse language data, obviously. So that means getting more samples of speech and text from people who actually use different dialects in their everyday lives. So some teams are using crowdsourcing, basically like asking everyday speakers to contribute examples of their local dialects. And then others are working with linguists and language communities to make sure that the models truly capture, the depth and the levels of human communication that it needs. So once they have this data, they have to make sure it's high quality and that it's labeled properly. And that's where linguists and AI specialists and native speakers come in. They can help AI learn by identifying which words and phrases and accents belong to which dialects. And since languages constantly evolve, this process isn't one and done. AI models have to continually update to stay accurate. So how do they teach AI to recognize a dialect? Well, one method, according to an article that I'm going to link in the show notes, is called transfer learning. And this basically takes an AI model that already understands language and fine-tunes it with new dialect data. Another approach is data augmentation, which takes existing language samples, like changing the speed or pitch of speech, to help AI understand the natural variations in how people talk. And of course, there are going to be challenges. Some dialects don't have a lot of written records or audio samples. The smaller the dialect community, obviously fewer samples that you're going to have, and that makes data collection tricky. Because AI models learn from the data they're given, they're going to reflect a bias against the data that's lacking, or against the, accent for which the data is lacking. So researchers have to just constantly work making sure that AI doesn't favor certain dialects over others or misinterpret certain ways of speaking. But for all of the things about AI that concern us, the benefits of improving its ability to understand speech are huge. So you think about a world where translation apps work perfectly no matter what dialect you speak. Business could better serve customers from all over. Public services can communicate more effectively. Public services like 911, for example. This kind of AI could even help preserve endangered languages by making them more accessible in digital spaces. And I think that's everything because, I've done episodes on endangered languages. I've done an episode on the Cherokee language, for example. Indigenous languages are endangered and they're working to bring them back. And I think there have to be these wonderful possibilities with AI on helping to preserve those. Since we're talking about AI on this episode, I want to make sure that everyone knows about the Appalachian Writing Project's Teaching with AI Institute, June 2nd through 4th, 2025, on the campus of UVA's College at Wise. And that's where we will gather to explore this wild west of generative AI and how to harness its power as educators. So K through college educators in any discipline are invited to register, and that link to the registration form and the schedule will be in the show notes. We'll break down what AI is, the ethics surrounding its use, how to help students critically evaluate it, and then ways that it can enhance our teaching. Teachers in the Southwest Virginia region, you don't want to miss this great opportunity, so be sure to register by April 15th. Thanks for listening, and remember to keep talking Appalachian.